this.
Why are you
Got
looking at
this
me
open.
like
I'm not looking
Here we
at
go.
Do you
you.
think you're ugly?
Stop it. Okay. Welcome to our podcast. Wait. Welcome. There we go. Yeah. Welcome to our podcast. This is our podcast. Welcome to our podcast. This is my family. My name's Michael. These are my daughters, Bria and Olive. This is our third attempt at trying to start this, but I guess third time's a charm or whatever that thing is. So, I don't even know where to start. I have a few ideas of where I'm going to start. I kind of know where I started last time, but things have obviously changed since last time. We recorded one episode a couple of months ago before we moved out of my mom's house and started our new lives here, and that was a fun adventure, but that recording didn't really portray what I wanted it. It was kind of rushed, it was kind of forced, and so I didn't want it to feel like that. And so we recorded our first official podcast 2 weeks ago. I thought it went really well. We got it kind of flowing, and you'll kind of understand as I start here what I mean by that. But I've got something that I want to read in order to start this, and then hopefully I'm going to talk for a little bit on where I came from and have a few tidbits. And then I want my kids to talk because I don't want this to be about me. I'm going to kind of lay down some groundwork, and it's my idea and it's kind of my thing, and I want my family to be a part of it as much as they want to be a part of it. I was kind of forced to do things as a kid, and we're all kind of forced to do things like that as far as religious things or going with our parents to do certain stuff. And I feel like I haven't really made my kids do a lot of that, but this is going to kind of be I'm making them do something right now. So I am going to take a second here at the beginning. My daughter and me, which we will talk about in this episode after our first episode, that's why we're recording this again, had a discussion, kind of had a falling out. It was interesting to me. It's still something that's interesting. It's something that I deal with all the time, but in having that conversation with her a couple of weeks ago, and before she kind of decided she didn't want to talk to me anymore, I kind of wrote something out that kind of put some of my ideas down on paper. I'm not a big writer, not that I can't write, but it's just one of those things I never thought like I had anything important enough to write about, and I didn't want to be just another voice out there saying random things. But the older I've gotten, the more I've been around my kids, the more I've lived in the world, the more I've realized like I there's things I don't like, and there's things I want to change, and there's things I want to talk about, and things I don't want to just indoctrinate my kids into. And so that's why I want to do this, because it's like I'm trying to help create a better world for them. I'm trying to let them have better ideas and challenge me and other adults and that kind of thing. So I'm going to read this real quick just to kind of lay down some things. I'll probably post it with the post to kind of have it be like a mission statement just so people can read it. But I would like to read it out loud because it is something that kind of encompasses what my philosophy is, but that's what we're going to kind of break down in this podcast, and hope to have discussions with my daughters and encourage back and forth and community and growth and helping people. And so here we go. I'm just going to read this. I want to learn and understand humans, bringing people together for the betterment of the human existence. Deconstruct our society and indoctrination without completely going backwards and being primitive, but re-evolving our human experience coming from a more educated and experienced place, taking down controlling and enslaving institutions that come from a very outdated and primitive mindset. We are animals and need to remember and be in touch with that so we can be better humans. We've never really known and accepted that, so everything we have at this point is from humans playing human characters without ever really understanding who those characters are and where they came from. It's just the past trying to mold the present to control the unknown. And I've kind of tweaked that a little bit, but I kind of like that because I feel like that's what we're in, where it's always the past trying to control the present because we don't know what happens in the future. And so they feel like if we can control the present and make rules and all that kind of stuff. And so I was just beside it. So we've never had to pick and choose what we want to do or who we want to become. Most of our evolution has consisted of us just existing and surviving. Though we all want to have a calling or a purpose, a magic sensation that points us in the right direction and makes you stubbornly defiant to any redirection. Well, that's how we got where we are today, because a primitive human had an idea and believed it was right. Then they sold it to other humans who were also searching for meaning and purpose in a vast, dark, and unrelentless universe that we're lucky enough to be conscious in. And I say we're lucky enough to be conscious in this time of our evolution because we're the first species on this planet that have evolved out of just surviving. We have reached a point in our evolution where we can set aside just being animals. If we can figure out a way to stop killing and enslaving each other for land, water, resource rights like other animals do, then we can actually be humans. We just call ourselves humans and pretend to be different than animals. But being a species that has figured out a way to take care of all other animals, including each other as well as the planet, learning to share and use the earth to make our one and only known existence be the best possible for everyone, whatever that may be. It definitely sounds sadistic, but I like to talk to people that have an idea or an ideology that they've latched onto for comfort and direction and poke at it. This always consists of a heated and sometimes scary and emotional discussion, argument that ends in a storm out. Seeing fight and flight like this in humans is very interesting and sad. We have evolved this elaborate speech capability to share and explore our ideas, but when someone challenges our ideas, we have the same physical response as a real threat. We hold on to ideas and personal beliefs like they are required for our survival. When we were primitive animals, we needed this to survive. Certain animals have always thought they were different or better than other animals, so they feel justified having and doing things others don't, or can't, such as using and enslaving others for ease of life and having excess. Being a pack and herd animal, we have such a natural instinct to be accepted and fit in, to have the right things, go to the right places, and participate in the right activities. But that doesn't exist. It's just someone who had an idea, invented it, and convinced the group that it is something. Our world is a beautiful and magical place just as it is. We don't need to create and make believe to keep each other moving in a unified direction anymore. We need to live in the same reality so we can all be present at the same place. If every culture and every person ultimately has their own belief system, then we're all just living in different realities. We definitely all come from different places and have evolved with different cultures, customs, and religions. Those are beautiful and tell us the story of how we evolved. The things we've used in the past to give us unity and oneness also create separation and division. Humans like to form groups to feel safe, which leads us to creating enemies out of things that look different. But ultimately, we are the same animals, just look different. And we are all only a fraction different evolutionary-wise from an ape in the jungle. But we've never really known that until now and haven't really accepted it when thinking of how to shape our families, towns, and ultimately society as a whole. It's scary and sad to think that people have been existing and growing their entire lives without ever really knowing who they are, what they want to do with their time on this planet, because they're immediately forced into an institution or a belief system that they have no choice over that shapes everything about who they are, how they might view the world and their reality as a whole, without anybody ever questioning or having the ability to stop and figure out who we are, where we came from, and why we're here. All the questions still being asked by everyone today. Up until now, we've just imagined how things are supposed to be and then sold it as the right answer. So, that was kind of something that I had wrote and sent to my daughter as just something that felt like it was very encompassing of my thoughts and my ideas, and I'm going to expand on that a little bit more over the next few minutes. Okay, so within reading that, I just kind of wanted to encompass things, but I also just want to give like kind of a free who I am, what I want to do this for. So I was raised in Oregon, right here. I was raised in a very religious household with, I would consider it being a cult. Like, my grandfather was very dictator, and he was very much head of the household. Family did what they were told, followed in line. That was the only kind of information I was ever given growing up. And so as I grew up and got older, I started to question that. The more questions I asked, the more my family kind of didn't appreciate that. I definitely got treated differently. I was kind of the outcast of my family because I didn't just fall in line and believe what I was told. And so that's kind of why I'm doing this. Again, I want my kids to not feel like they just have to believe again what they're told. I was never taught to question my grandparents. When I started realizing certain things in my 20s, was when I started to grow up and realize, like, man, my grandparents went to the same high school that I went to. They didn't go to college. They didn't learn anything more than their religion kind of taught them. Definitely didn't read as much and experience as much as I did. I feel like my grandparents always went through their travels and their life with blinders on. They were always trying to not see things or not involve themselves in things, and kept themselves very isolated from the rest of the world, even though they were trying to spread a message. And that was always really weird to me, because whenever I started questioning authority figures, they all kind of disappeared. They all kind of would stop answering questions, and it was always really kind of disheartening for me to have to deal with that. And so we're all born. I was born into a religious system. I was also born into a small town school system. So nobody, when I was growing up in my history class, ever talked to me about the genocide that went on when the Pilgrims landed in America. All we learned about was Thanksgiving and Native Americans. We didn't learn about genocide and all that kind of stuff. And still to this day, we don't talk about that kind of stuff. Just like, it's just another one of those, like, keeping secrets, not talking about things, pretending like things from the past didn't exist anymore. Things I try to encourage my kids and people to understand, and my philosophy is, okay, if human beings are just evolved animals on this planet, then essentially everything that human beings have done up until this point, we've just imagined it and created it. And a lot of that comes from a very primitive place. Like, I look at how human beings have created everything, and literally everything in our society that doesn't exist as far as like food, water, shelter, and companionship, human beings just created and invented it. And then we make people think that that's right. Like, it really bothers me today when people talk about how we have a homeless problem. It's like, we don't have a homeless problem. We created a society that exiles people, creates upper crust people and lower crust people. I've done a lot of service industry jobs, and I've had to deal with a lot of rich people. And rich people, just, not all of them, but have this very much sense of, I'm better than you because I have more money than you, because I travel more than you. That makes me better than you. But it's just, again, the system and the environment that we were brought up in. But none of us, especially me, growing up in a very dictatorship, authoritarian household, I was never allowed to question why we did anything. And so, again, it was really weird for me growing up because, and I'm sure a lot of people deal with this, where I never felt like I was able to be myself, explore myself, find out what I wanted to do in life. I was just immediately shoved into a system: go to school, go to church, do what you're told, graduate, get a job, get married, have kids. That's what you're supposed to do. And that's what our society always tells us to do. And that's what I did. And I was a very good church kid. I volunteered in church more than anybody I knew. But as soon as I stopped believing that system, the church discarded me. I was always the best employee at a place that I worked until I started questioning the system that I was working in. And then all of a sudden, I wasn't a part of that system anymore. So it's really interesting how our entire world is just brought up. We're all brought up to buy into systems. And when you don't buy into that system, you're automatically either demonized or criminalized. And it's one of those, we've never had the conversation of, do we need empires? Do we need corporations? Do we need people who own people? Like, again, I'm supposed to, and this is going to jump around a lot, and hopefully as we explore some of these things, I just really want to kind of get all my ideas out there. And the way that the internet works, and my kids have heard this, we can stitch it, people can respond to it however they want. I just want to try to get as much of kind of my ideas out during this first one. And I don't mind that my kids are just chilling. They've kind of heard this a lot, but I want them to kind of rehear it again, because I want this to be something that we can move forward with, because I'm trying to teach my kids. So again, I'm going to jump all over the place. I was indoctrinated to a system. I got married and I had kids. And the reason I couldn't be married to my ex-wife anymore was because I was trying to evolve. I was trying to be something different. I didn't want to raise my kids in some authoritarian household where they weren't allowed to think and create, because I was in that. I was in that same system where I had to go to work. I had to get a job. We have to survive. You have to buy into the system. But nobody really ever teaches you where that system came from and why it's there. Again, I don't remember in school they teaching me about how money isn't really real and we just invented it. The stock market doesn't exist. It's only man-made, and it only exists in our current world situation. But it's like, do we need that? Is that good for human beings? Should we evolve into doing those kind of things? It was one of those, human beings are very much like, we like things to be black and white, but the truth is most of the world we live in is probably very gray. It's like, capitalism isn't the right answer, communism isn't the right answer, socialism isn't the right answer. It's probably a culmination of all of those, but people like to latch onto an idea, give it a title, and then that has to be something that we push forward with, where we've never stopped to be like, I used the example with my kids recently where it's like, think about lead. Like, within the last 100 years, someone decided to put lead in our gas, lead in our paint, lead in our pipes for our water sources. And it's one of those, like, they probably just did it because it was cheap and it was easy and they wanted to turn a profit. But nobody ever stops to think, do we need to make lead paint? Like, is lead paint something that was good? And so someone wants to turn a profit, they want to make a quick buck, so they find something and they sell it to people, and it goes on for however long until we finally figure out that it's not good for us. But all along that time, someone who's selling us bad things is trying to convince us that they're not selling us bad things, and they're trying to change the rules so that they don't have to quit selling us bad things. And then once our society finally says stop selling us bad things, then eventually we can kind of start doing it. But that is silly to me. That doesn't make any sense. As a father, and the more my kids have gotten older and the more I've learned about myself and society, the more I realize, like, my parents did me a disservice, and most parents do their kids a disservice, because we're supposed to give our kids an advantage. We're supposed to move them forward and give them the information as much as we can. When I was a kid, if you were a kid, grown-ups and parents didn't freely give you information. They gatekeeped it, and information was how they kept control. And so it's like, same with our government today, same with businesses today. It seems like the more you want to be a shitty person, the more layers you put between you and the public. So it's like the CEOs and the shareholders and your boss and your principal and all those kind of people, they don't like to answer questions from the basic general public. They feel like they're better, but it's like, it's kind of like the more shitty things that you do, the more buffer you have to put between the people that you're doing shitty things to. And so that was kind of one of those, as a 20-something-year-old, after I graduated college and had my culinary arts degree, I was going to try to go out and conquer the world. But nobody tells you that, oh, if you want to start a business, well, you essentially have to own what I consider as modern-day slaves, because you have to underpay somebody to do a job that you wouldn't want to do. And to me, that's the same as owning a slave. Or you have to be a slave, where you start out at the bottom, and yeah, hopefully you can work hard, but why should you have to start out at a place where you can barely make it? I've used the story, the more I learned about slavery and slave culture in America, the more it kind of opened my eyes to the kind of the minimum wage employee corporate culture. Because back when slavery was a thing, the slave owner had to provide the food, the shelter, the medical care, the time off, anything that your slave that you needed, or that you had as the owner to provide it for them. Well, when we abolished slavery, first of all, the thought that we had to abolish slavery, the fact that we had to fight a war because ignorant people who wanted an easy life and wanted to own other human beings didn't want to give that up, and so we had to fight a war over that. And then how come we never learned in school about, after we fought a war over racism, the re-education process that went into educating ignorant people who thought it was okay to own human beings? We didn't do that. They were just allowed to keep being horrible human beings. Do you think when we abolished slavery that all the slave owners who owned slaves and plantations just all of a sudden put gloves on and started working? No, that's silly to even think that that was a thing, and we don't learn about that. What did all the plantation owners do who owned slaves? Well, none of those slaves are allowed to go out in the real world because it was still pretty much illegal and unsafe for them to be anywhere. And then it's kind of the wooden nickel theory, where if you research some of the mill towns where a mill would open up in a place and all the workers would move to that area, and the mill would essentially pay the workers in what was essentially wooden nickels. The only place that they could spend them was inside of their encampment, where the mill owned the housing, they owned the food source, they owned the water, they owned the electricity, they owned everything. And so you were essentially working just to pay everything back to the owner. Well, that's essentially what happened with slavery and with our modern day American system, was essentially like somebody had to own everything. Well, the slaves didn't get a chance to own everything. And so the people who owned the plantations, well, now they built housing and charged rent. And they opened up restaurants and grocery stores and charged for supplies, the things that they used to have to give out for free. And so that was how our modern day American dream system came, was rich people wanting to still not have to work, not have to provide for themselves. Because if evolution is a thing and human beings are just evolved animals, then our only responsibility for ourselves every single day and for our community is to go out and gather resources, whether that resources is food for our dinner, water for ourselves to live and clean, better our living environment and our situation for the people around us. So I've definitely been rambling quite a bit, and I'd like to kind of refocus on maybe a topic that we can talk about to kind of involve my kids and start to kind of dissect my story and who I am. So I have 4 kids. I was married for 13 years. All my kids are with the same mom. My oldest 2 are twins, and they're 22 years old. I have an 18-year-old... 23. Yeah, they're 23 now. Sorry. My oldest are 23, and then I have an 18-year-old and an 11-year-old. And so in my earlier years of growing up, definitely my oldest kids have seen the worst side of me, because they've seen me deconstructing. They've seen me trying to make a marriage work when my partner didn't support me in becoming who I wanted to become. Being surrounded by like family that didn't want to support me. Again, going back to me feeling like my entire life I was being told I was wrong just because I didn't want to buy into a system and do what I was told. And so I've tried to challenge my kids. I felt like I was a very good father. Me and my son, I was like a coach on all of his teams, went to all the games. I've never missed any school functions with my kids. Taken family vacations. I was camping trips and just all sorts of activities and stuff. Like I always felt like I tried to be the best dad I could. But again, I was in a system that I didn't understand why I was doing what I was doing. Nobody had taught me, I guess, anything at that point. You're just kind of, again, I don't like grown-ups. To me, grown-ups are just adults who think they have it all figured out and don't like to be questioned. And so it was like the older I got, the more I had less and less friends, because it was weird to me watching the adults that I knew weren't more educated than me. They didn't know anything more than me. They just developed very strong opinions, whether that was religion or politics or just a belief that they had that I would challenge. And they would all turn into like, it was amazing with my grandparents, with my parents, with friends and family, other people that I cared about and I thought cared about me. As soon as I challenged what they believed, then that it was over. And so I want to talk about something, because the reason we're recording another episode, and I feel like this one's been a little frantic, the episode that we recorded last week definitely felt a little bit more cohesive as far as me talking. But that's fine, because it'll be what it is. And so with me being me, my son has not talked to me for 6 years. Whoa.
I'm knocking everything over.
My son has not talked to me for 6 years. Now, I'm not sure why that happened. Nobody will tell me. He still hasn't talked to me. He was 16 years old. We were going through the divorce. It is what it is. And then, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, my middle daughter, Bria, we had an argument. the way that I remember it, and she doesn't really remember it, but the way that I remember it is my youngest daughter, Olive, during COVID maybe it wasn't, because it was during COVID.
No, it was not.
It wasn't during COVID? You're sure?
I'm positive. I'm 100% positive.
Okay. I mean, again, because I could have swore it was I was trying to do the little people stuff with her, and I was...
You started that before COVID, though.
Was it?
Yeah,
okay.
She started making videos before then.
Okay, because I just remember my daughter my youngest, Olive, she was the first one of our kids that really grew up with YouTube and really grew up as kind of an iPad kid. And she used to watch a lot of little Polly Pocket videos and little people videos and kind of those like unboxing things, or people just using toys to tell stories and like just make little kid content. Littlest pet shops, that kind of thing. And so I was encouraging Olive, instead of watching so much of it, let's make some of it. So I was encouraging her to write ideas, and we were making little sets and coming up with little film things, and we were trying to work on all that stuff. And I remember at one point there was just an afternoon, we were all hanging out in the apartment, and Olive was working on something. I think she was working on creating a character or writing a story, but essentially she had created a character name that didn't fit its gender, and Bria was giving her a hard time about it. She says she was just like making fun of her or giving her a hard time, teasing. But it was a big deal to me because she was bawling. They were fighting about it, and Bria is very much an kind of alternative person. She went to an alternative high school. She's supposedly very accepting of that kind of stuff, and so for me to hear her giving her little sister, who I'm encouraging to be free and open-minded and creative and think for herself, pretty much giving her limitations, telling her that she can't name something a certain name because of its gender. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, literally, names are just noises that we make to identify other human beings. Like, I like to take everything back to the most primitive, understand it from the most basic thing. And all these noises that we're making are just us expressing our feelings to each other. And the fact that for some reason we get to where we can't do that is interesting. So me and Olive and Bria were fighting, and I interjected and finally said, hey, you guys come outside, come into the living room. Let's figure this out. And so they explained their sides, and it was the same thing. It was Bria was teasing her little sister, giving her a hard time, whatever. And for me, again, we're family. We're supposed to support each other. Like, I always stop them when they give each other a hard time and say that they're ugly or dumb or their outfit doesn't look right or something. Because, again, the rest of the world does that to us all the time. So we should definitely support each other inside the household. So with my youngest daughter trying to create something and be independent, I didn't appreciate that. And so essentially I was pretty hard on Bria as she kept coming back at me with more trying to justify it and make excuses. And I essentially just told her, like, shut up, Bria, I don't want to hear anything else from you. Like, whatever you're saying is just making excuses. Olive can name her characters any name that she wants to name them. You should be accepting of that. And so the next week, Bria decided not to come back to my house, and we essentially didn't talk for like a year or two because of that situation. So jumping forward, last week after recording our first episode, my oldest daughter, who I really wanted to be a part of this because she's kind of the most different from my other two daughters, and she was also got to know me as I feel like a different person. Like when I was her dad growing up, I wasn't the best version of myself. I was angry. I was trying to figure myself out. Again, I was in a system that I felt trapped in, and I didn't know what to do with that. And so I really wanted her to be a part of that. But so after we were done filming, she was having a discussion with her sister about a book. And they were talking about how an author had released a series and made special covers and collector's editions, and they were talking about wanting to have all of it, or they thought they'd ordered the best of the exclusive series, but it turns out there was a different something. And essentially after listening to them, I kind of agreed with my oldest daughter in a sense. Like, sure, yeah, if an author really doesn't want to do that, they can not do that. Or it kind of definitely tells a lot about somebody if they're trying to manipulate their audience to try to make as much money as they can. But ultimately, I broke it down to you are a capitalist inside of a capitalist system complaining about somebody who wants to make as much money off they can as they can off of the other people. Like, that's what capitalism creates. Capitalism creates, I'm going to go out and try to sell something to a bunch of people that probably don't necessarily need it, and we don't even know if we need to have what we're selling. But if we can make money off of it and we can get people to buy it, that's all we're taught in our entire, like, capitalized American. You see it on TV, you advertise, you have to buy it. So it's like we're just all indoctrinated into this system that we have to go get jobs and get credit cards and buy things and go to things that in our entire evolutionary history, we've never done that. Like, people made you clothes. You made your own clothes. We're the first species that's evolved off this planet that doesn't know how to function in our day-to-day lives. And that's really interesting to me. But so my oldest daughter, while having this capitalist argument that they were having, I was just like, well, that your entire thing you're arguing about, I'm sorry, is dumb. Like, you're literally arguing again about a capitalist being a capitalist in a system. And so the conversation continues along, and her arguments are still kind of all the same. She's just kind of trying to justify why somebody would want to do this. But ultimately it came down to, I think it was a money thing. I don't know if it was she was mad that she didn't have the money to spend or whatever it was. But essentially I was challenging her that's dumb. Like, why do you need to buy things? Why not make things? Why not surround yourself with beautiful things that are made by people that you know and care about, or that you're connected to, not just something that you buy online and get shipped to you and put on a wall or put on a bookshelf or something. Like, it doesn't mean anything. Our world is so full of meaningless things that we all argue about and fight over, that we've never in our entire evolution been able to do that. Just sit and shop and constantly buy things and watch things and be consumed by our entire environment. Like, we've never had that in our evolutionary history. And I want to start having that conversation. And so I challenged my daughter, and she didn't like that. So I asked her, like, okay, well, what ultimately do you want to kind of do with your life? And she was like, I want to finish school. I want to get a job. I want to get a nice house. I want to own some rental properties, and I want to retire. And I essentially told her, like, wow, that's just like some basic white bitch shit right there. Like, I'm sorry, but that is it. That's a basic, like, that doesn't exist in our world. Being able to get a job, own some rental properties, and retire. That doesn't exist in the human in evolution. That doesn't evolve. Like, that didn't evolve as part of being a human being. But we pretend like it's a part of our society, like that's the way it's supposed to be. But again, we're human animals. We evolved on this planet, and everything about our modern day American society is I love modern day medicine, and I love all that stuff. But it's like it's created these horrible animals that don't care about each other. They only care about buying things and doing stuff. And so essentially last week, after I kind of bluntly, I mean, it's my daughter, and I'm not coming from a rude place, and in my opinion, wanting to live that life where you get a job, work for somebody for 30 years, save money, retire. Like, first of all, that's just justifying being a slave for 30 years, because nobody wants to do that. No animals ever evolved to work for somebody for 30 years and then retire. Like, yeah, I don't want to go back to having to forage for bugs and live in a straw hut. But guess what? Somewhere on our planet right now, someone is living in a mud hut and foraging for shrubs and grubs. And that person is no different than us living here. Like, we're only a product of our society. I've had this conversation with my daughters. If you take somebody from America at 1 day old and put them in a village in Africa, and take a baby from Africa and put it in America and raise them in those environments, they're going to be products of their environment just the same. Just because you take somebody from a poor, uneducated area and put them in an educated system, they're going to become that. Like, that's again, it shows to me that we are the same evolutionary wise. Again, we're taught to look at, I live in America and I live in a house. So if you live in another country and you live in a mud hut, then you're less than me for some reason, or you're not equal to me. But the truth is they are. Just like the homeless person on the corner, raised in a system that doesn't care about them, being driven by rich people who are heading to whatever function they're going to, talking about how that guy on the street is not as good as them, or it's worthless, or whatever. And for me, that's always been a problem. And that's the society that I'm told that I have to raise my kids in. Another thing, I'm going to let my kids talk because I want to stop talking for a minute. Another thing that my daughter told me during our conversation last week that has further motivated me to do this, it's kind of the reason that my thoughts are all over the place, and I'm going to have to be patient and let this podcast and these discussions with my daughters evolve. But my daughter last week told me too, like, well, I just have to do that because what am I going to do? You can't change the world in your lifetime. And that broke my heart to think, like, here's my daughter in 2024 in America where we're taught you can do whatever you want, and people for our entire history, all we do is learn about people who have changed the world in their lifetimes for the better or for the worse. And it's like, why can't we change the world for the better? I feel like the world is in a place right now where it wants to be better. We're trying to evolve out of being told what to do by people who don't know what they're trying to do. And so you guys talk and say something because I feel like I want to stop talking. Introduce yourselves. Talk about what I've talked about.
I'm going to go first, aren't I? Yeah. Just like last time.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Bria Lucille. I never know how to introduce myself because they're going to call me Bria, but for basically everyone outside of my household, I am Lucille. So, Bria Lucille. And I am 18. I am the middle child. And, I mean, I guess, I don't know. Let's talk about, like, what you talked about. Let's say.
Yeah.
First off, I have not stopped talking to you because of that argument. I do vaguely remember this argument. I do know that it happened. I remember it being a thing. But, like, it was definitely not the reason I left. I don't even know if it was that was, like, the tipping point. I can't remember. But I do know that I had been thinking about it before that conversation had even happened. It was, I don't know, that time, it was an interesting time. I was a freshman. I was 14. So it was 4 years ago. Almost exactly. And it was a time. I was just not happy there. There were so many reasons. It's just one of those things. Anyway, I don't know what else. That's kind of it. There was a lot of things, and then we didn't really talk for 2 years, I think, until like my 16th birthday, because I invited you to my 16th birthday. And then we didn't talk a lot at all. Yeah. We, arguably, you could probably say that we really didn't talk, or we didn't have a relationship until, like, this last year, because, like, I invited you to things, and you came to things, but we didn't really talk outside of those things until I eventually moved in with him, because I ended up leaving my mom's house, in that situation, and moving in with my older sister, and I lived with her for almost a year, not quite, it was like 9 months, and then we all, including my older sister, moved in with my dad and his mom, and then we got here a year later, and then, yeah, I mean, there's not really much to say with, like, the Grace stuff.
Yeah,
it was just,
I mean, again, if you didn't see anything that I corrected you on or anything.
I mean, not really. Let's not want to get really technical about, like,
I mean,
the
I don't
books.
care.
No.
Again, yeah, like I want to hear your side of it, or let's talk about it, because it's an issue. It's one of those, or maybe we let Olive introduce herself. Olive, introduce yourself.
Okay. I'm Olive. I'm the youngest of my family. And I'm pretty basic. I'm in 6th grade. I'm about to turn 12 next week. I don't know. I'm pretty standard. I'm in band. I'm one of those kids whose favorite period is lunch. And I don't know. I have a group of friends that I hang out with from sports because I play volleyball. I used to play softball when I was like 3, but like that doesn't count.
But softball.
So what?
Nothing.
And so yeah, I don't know. That's really I don't have much to talk about.
No, that's good. I mean, again, I hope that as we develop this again, that you guys can start to come up with ideas. Hopefully, as we put this out online and we can engage with people, we can come up with an ideas. You guys can hopefully come up with things from school that you want to talk about. Because again, I want this to be about everything. I have a weird life philosophy and I want to get that out and I want to share my ideas as part of it. But I also just want to have conversations. Like, I was never encouraged to have conversations with my family. We were just told to sit and listen. And I don't want that. That's not healthy. That's not smart. That's not intelligent. I want to talk about my life. Like, I want to interview people. I've lived a pretty interesting life. Again, growing up being indoctrinated into the church and a Christian is something that is a very big deal to me in America because it's a major part of our politics and how a big portion of our country thinks and gets their values from. And I've seen it firsthand living on the inside of it, being around adults who are not adults. They just, what?
So you were talking about school, and I found this pretty amusing. So, like, beginning of this month, I kind of stopped hanging out with my old friend group because of, like, a thing that happened with a certain, like, 2 people in it that I just, like, didn't feel comfortable around those people. And so, while me being friends with those, they were kind of like how my dad says the alternative kids. They just, I don't want to sound like, I don't know, they were just different from like everybody. They weren't falling into like the standard. And so I recently started hanging out with them, and I started hanging out with girls in my grade who did sports, who were really smart. Everybody liked me, and I thought that was pretty funny.
Oh, it's interesting. So those are the kind of things that I want to explore, because again, the questions that I want to answer and things I want to bring up to my kids is we were never taught about how like evolution has become a big thing in my lifetime. Like, yeah, Darwin started talking about it hundreds of years ago, and people have been dealing with trying to learn about science and evolution. But it's sad because think about like the Christian crusades and that kind of thing. Like, how many times have there been cultures and civilizations trying to develop a peaceful existence where they were working with science and working with intelligent people, and stubborn in non-intelligent kind of that kind of thing with people is frowned upon. So we, like, how many times did those cultures exist? And then we had an authoritarian system come through that killed all of that, annihilated everybody, killed all of their art, burned everything that they had, killed anybody who knew anything, only kept people that they could enslave or rape or something. I don't know. Like, we were horrible human beings. And that's what our entire system has been built on, is by horrible human beings doing horrible things and then trying to justify them later on instead of actually talking about it. Things like our entire country was founded on genocide, stealing a continent from the people who already lived here. The men who founded it were slave owners and probably didn't like to have conversations with normal people about why they were doing what they were doing. And so if our country and our Bill of Rights and our entire Constitution can be written and founded and brought into existence by people that were slave owners, that were uneducated, that didn't even know really there was no planes, there was no electricity, we barely could communicate with each other. And so we have these hierarchy systems that I believe have been in place ever since our evolution has came along. Like, we know that men in our culture are driven to be alphas or whatever, and that's always been that if I can dominate you and I can kill you, then my idea lives on. So how many good people with good ideas who didn't want to kill to further their values existed in this world, but people came along with systems and values that wanted to enslave and believed that people were less than you because they believed and lived differently than you. How many of those kind of patriarchal, horrible, frat boy mentality kind of guys killed anybody who looked artsy or looked different or dressed different or acted different? Well, guess what? That's our human pack, or our animalistic pack mentality coming into play, that says if you dress different, look different, talk different, we're afraid of you and you're probably bad or evil and we need to exile you or kill you or eliminate you. It's very much that pack mentality. Why a herd of deer all look exactly the same? Because that's what our pack wants. It's the group think, it's the group act, it's the do what everybody else does. And animals are very scared of different things that don't talk like you, act like you, look like you. And so in our society, people who break off and be different are people that usually are kind of outcasts of our society because they don't think like the rest of the group. They don't look like the rest of the group. So now the group's afraid of that. And that's what we need to start at, like a very elementary level, instead of, because again, in evolution, you have young animals and you have adult animals. But in humans, we have kids and we have teenagers and we have young adults and we have adults and we have employees and we have managers and we have regional managers and we have CEOs and we have stockholders. But that's just a bunch of crap that human beings made up to segregate ourselves and give ourselves different levels. But essentially, as I've grown up and sat at many poker tables and have many conversations in bars with other men, and realized that the average man graduated high school at 18 years old, didn't go to college, barely made it through high school, memorizing as little information as possible, didn't continue to learn any information, and was just completely stumped. But somehow they're an adult and they figured out the world and they can't talk about things. And if you try to challenge them on their beliefs and ideas, they immediately go into fight or flight mode, shut down, and you can't continue. So we need to encourage people to have conversations instead of beliefs. If you have a belief, that's great. Let's explore it. Let's talk about it. But if you have a belief that you have to kill for or run away for or something like that, then maybe that's not a belief that we need to have, or a belief that's healthy. And so I want to start having these conversations and breaking systems down and trying to understand where it came from and challenging the people that created those systems, and try to start making a better world for my daughters to grow up in, so that they don't have to feel like they have to be a part of something other than just being a human being. Like, you don't have to pick a college. Colleges were just invented. You don't have to pick a job. Jobs were just invented. Like, we literally just invented cars. We just invented dolls. We just invented electricity. All of that stuff that pretty much every human being has dealt with over the last 100 years, that we use to identify our sexes and our different levels of education and societal norms, are things that we just invented recently. And so it's so silly to me that we don't break that down into, well, does a little girl need to play with dolls and a little boy need to play with trucks? Guess what? We just invented trucks. Trucks didn't exist 200 years ago or 150 years ago. And so no little boys would ever have been playing with trucks, because that didn't exist. But now if you're a boy, you have to play with trucks, and if you're a girl, you can't play with trucks. And it's like, that's silly to me. That doesn't make sense. Those are simple animal things not wanting to move forward, I guess. And so, you guys have anything to add?
No.
This has been so random. I'm going to put this out. I apologize to everyone who's watching this. Hopefully we will be better. I'm putting this out. I promise I am putting this out. But I just wanted to get this out there somewhere. I wanted to start somewhere. Because again, like, I was in church. I was all I knew growing up, and that's all my parents told me that I had to do. But I really don't want to tell my kids what they have to do. I'd like to help direct them and teach them and encourage them to learn things and ask questions. But again, I don't want them to feel like they have to, again, choose a job. Like, that's so weird that I have to, at 18 years old, choose what I want to do for the rest of my life, buy into an education, become an indentured servant to a system, and then have to go get a job for the rest of my life to pay it off. Like, that's not a free system. That's not a healthy environment. That doesn't exist in the animal kingdom. And so it's like, that's it. That's our first episode. This is our family. Welcome to our home. I hope to do lots more stuff and actually move forward. I wanted to develop a nonprofit. I want to try to help people. I want my media company, and the reason that I went back to school and got my media degree, I want to help other nonprofits who are doing the good thing to help people and not be rich, make a better world for people. And so until next time, we'll hopefully have a couple of episodes that come out pretty back to back here over the next couple of weeks, and then we'll just see where it goes from there. So thanks, and we're out of here.
Did you introduce yourself?
What does that mean? I don't know.